Hey everyone, Tony D and Little Joan here with a hot take and another message to Tim Pool. I know I sent one before. That guy Gary Lamb just did one and got retweeted. But I think Tim is due for his next red pill. Yeah, he got a red pill. You got a red pill about Trump. But have you gotten a red pill about what to do about police reform? And it's very, very simple. Legalize drugs and prostitution. It's simple. It's that simple. Doggy agrees. Right, Doggy? You agree. Of course, you're a libertarian dog. It's so simple, Tim. The violence. Yes, Doggy. All right, you're gonna bark through the whole thing. Come here. Pain in the neck. I got you all comfy, and you got to do this. The entire violence, all the violence, can be linked back in the inner city to drugs. Drugs. It's always been drugs. In Prohibition times, the violence went through the roof. You're from Chicago. You know that history. The mafia came in and they bootlegged all day long. It was a victimless crime, essentially. And all the arguments for keeping booze illegal are the same exact arguments that they keep drugs and prostitution illegal. Right? It's, well, people get addicted. People get addicted to alcohol. It causes so much pain and misery. Alcohol causes pain and misery. We'll never be able to control it. We control pretty much alcohol. How many people do you know drink bathtub gin? Do you know anybody who's ever said, oh man, my friend just drank this illegal whiskey and he went blind? No, that doesn't happen anymore. Because no one in their right mind would ever buy whiskey from a guy selling it out of his trunk with no labels. The same exact thing would happen to drugs. And I'm talking about all the drugs. I'm not just talking about pot. I'm talking about heroin. I'm talking about cocaine. Every recreational drug you could think of. Because the manufacturer would be forced to take responsibility for their customers' safety. Because that's essentially what they'd be doing by selling them the drug in the first place. So if you had a dose of recreational cocaine, they would have all kinds of warnings and measurements and ingredients on the package. You would know exactly what you're getting. So the chances of you ODing and taking too much cocaine would be incredibly minimized. Same thing with heroin. Same thing with every drug known to man. Additionally, it would encourage those same companies to then put money into R&D to come up with synthetic versions. So imagine a synthetic version of heroin that you don't get addicted to, that you can just take and ride the dragon for a few hours, and then boom, you're as clear as a daisy, coming out the other side. And people don't like needles, so guess what else they're going to do? They're going to create situations where, well, you don't have to inject this heroin. You just pop a pill. You just snort it up your nose. Or you take a liquid form and put it in your eyes. Whatever's safe, these companies will gravitate towards because that's what their customers will want. And if these customers do become addicted and they do suffer health problems, well, what happened to the cigarette companies? They all got sued. Even some of the alcohol companies, the beer and other companies, they got sued too. They've gotten sued by people whose relatives spiraled down into addiction or whatever. It would encourage them to create less addicted drugs, and they would. And you could regulate them. Now, just because you do legalize everything doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be in every vending machine from here to Timbuktu. it's if it's legal, then you can regulate it. So, in the case of, say, recreational cocaine, you could put all kinds of parameters on it. So, you could only get it in certain amounts. You could only get it in certain places. You have to be a grown adult to get it. I remember back when I was a kid, we had kids in high school doing coke. Yeah. I mean, it was the 80s, but they'd get a hold of it. And they certainly did it in college. Oh my God. They absolutely did it in college. As soon as they got to college, it was, they'd go right into doing some coke. And it would discourage the other cheaper forms of the drugs. Like, what company's going to sell you crack? They wouldn't be able to sell it. It wouldn't be something their customers would want. It would be too low brow. It wouldn't be enough profit in it anyway. Once you legalize something, all the profit, from the gangster end of things evaporates. So back in Prohibition days, they're charging whatever they want for a beer or shot of whiskey. I mean, it was outrageous pricing for the time. It was the 1920s. Same thing is true today. If you legalize the drugs, and you have to do it nationwide, you can't just do it state by state, because there's still a thriving black market in Colorado, even though it's legal there. But if you legalize the entire country, there would be no black market. It would collapse. Economically, they couldn't compete. Prostitution, same way. Why would anyone go to a prostitute from some random gangster at an underground brothel when you could just go to the strip mall? Brothel R Us. or Hose R Us, or whatever they would call it. Or you could just order up one from the Marriott. And the Marriott would be on the hook if anything went wrong. Now, they'd probably have a whole thing with independent contractors, and it would all get very complicated, but the state would regulate it. They already do it in Nevada. Nevada's not burning down. And what that does is it takes money away from organized crime. Organized crime economically would collapse without the revenue from drugs and prostitution, especially prostitution. Prostitution is one of the easiest things that keeps organized crime going, because all they have to do is find a girl and intimidate her. And we're talking guys who live in poor neighborhoods, because that's where the recruits from organized crime come from. And if you're a thug and you're willing to bully young women or use your charm, it's usually a combination of both. They turn out these girls. You turn out 3 or 4 girls, you're making good bank. That's just reality. You can't make that bank if there's already a legal owned brothel in your neighborhood. You can't. No one will go to your girls. They'll say, "Who are these girls? Are they state run? Are they tested on a daily basis?" And of course the gangster will go, "Yeah." But you're going to believe a guy? Would you buy a beer from a guy in the street? No. You're not going to buy a beer. "Hey dude, I make beer. You want one?" It's $5. No, you're not going to buy that. You're going to be like, "What? No, I'm going to go to the store and buy beer like a normal human being." This is why it needs to be legalized. Now, with regard to defunding the police and all the police problems, suddenly all the police problems start to evaporate. Okay? Militarizing the police. Well, why are they militarized? Drug gangs. They're not militarized because of the mafia. The mafia doesn't have an army. Well, they do technically, but they don't have like an armed compound where federal agents storm it and have a shootout. That doesn't happen here. It never will, because those guys are high end. If the cops come, they just go, "Okay, call the lawyers." But criminal drug gangs are different. They're being squeezed at both ends. They're being squeezed by their competitors, and they're being squeezed by guys in the mafia or in organized crime who actually control turf. That's why they'll fight to the death sometimes, because they know if the cops catch them and they lose all this money for the guys they're working for, they're never going to forgive that debt. they will be indentured servants for life. There's no getting out from that. You're not gonna be able to go to your boss and say, well, we got raided. He'll just go, that was my money. You owe me that money. And you will work until you give it back to me. Essentially, making these guys work for next to nothing. Oh, they do it. They absolutely do it. In fact, they sometimes set up situations to do that to keep people in. If they have a guy they like, or a guy who's a good, let's say he's a good cook, like on Breaking Bad, or he's just a reliable guy, and he's saved up enough money, he looks like he's going to get out. He's going to retire. He's making noise about buying a house out in the suburbs and getting out of the life. But you want him. You need him. None of your other guys. All your other guys are idiots. You set him up. You do a police raid. You lose $100K, but you gain him. He's now your servant until he pays you that money back. And you look like the good guy. Well, I can't let this go, but, we'll work it out. It won't be too many years for you working for me. Except it will be. It'll be forever. By legalizing drugs, none of that can happen. By legalizing drugs, you don't need a militarized police force anymore. By legalizing drugs, you don't have cops jacking up randos on the street, including some people of color. Not always, but a lot of times. I mean, there are places in New Jersey, which you may or may not be aware, in North Jersey anyway, I saw this on Cops, where the cops will stop you because you look like a person who doesn't belong there because you're buying drugs. And that's like a pretense they use to stop you and find the drugs and arrest you. And a lot of times that happens, right? You've got some nice looking, well-to-do white kids in a very black neighborhood in a very nice car. They roll slowly by a place, stop, a guy talks to them for a minute, and then they're on their way. They've probably bought drugs. They have no other reason to be in that neighborhood. There's nothing else there. But that would all come to an end too, because those people would just buy it in the store or get it from their doctors or whatever. So you would not have, and the poor neighborhoods would benefit the most of all, because none of these drug gangs would be operating anymore. There just wouldn't be any money in it. Yeah, there'd still be crime, but it would be petty crime. It would be like crime like in the 50s. These drug gangs wouldn't even be able to afford guns anymore. They'd have to go back to knives. Because guns are expensive. I mean, you're talking like, what's a Glock? Like $1,300, something like that? Even more? Plus you got to buy the ammo. Plus you got to pay a street tax because you're probably not buying a legal one. It's an expensive proposition. But if you're not making money from drugs, you can't even afford it. You can't afford a car. You just go back to being poor and on the street. Now, that's another situation that we got to address, but some of those people could get jobs in the legal drug industry. Not the felons. You'd want to cut them out. But, the poor people who are suffering, they could get jobs. And there'd be tons of jobs. I mean, think about how many jobs there would be once pot is legal. You'll have pot bars, places for people to go just to buy pot, dispensaries, I guess you call them. They make edibles. They do all these things with pot. It creates jobs. The same thing would happen with the other drugs. Now, it probably wouldn't be on the same level as pot. Obviously, pot's a lot safer. But LSD, salvia, there'd be all sorts of synthetic replacements that, ecstasy. So, legalizing drugs is the way out. You could tax it. You could take the revenue, use it for drug programs for addicts. For prostitution, same thing. It makes it safe for the sex workers. Sex trafficking wouldn't be viable anymore. there wouldn't be a reason to do it. You can't make any money. You can't bring girls from China or Russia and force them to work in a legal brothel. They'll tell somebody. The legal brothel will work with the cops because it's a legal business. On top of the fact that with all these legal businesses, all these legal brothels everywhere, not to mention independent contractors, the price for getting a prostitute will be so competitive. Again, no profit. The profit will evaporate. They won't be able to charge those gangster rates. You could charge anything you want for a prostitute. If she's hot enough and somebody wants her bad enough, doesn't matter that it's said on her website it's $300 or $400. If a guy's horny and drunk, you charge him $1,500. If he complains, who cares? You're a gangster. But if you do that at a legal brothel, you call the cops. And the cops come and say, well, wait a minute. It says here on your menu, she only costs $400. How much did you charge? $1,500. Why, that's illegal, sir. You're under arrest. That's the way it would work. The gangsters will mostly retire. The rich ones. The rich ones retire. The guys on the bottom, they haven't really gotten too deep into life. They'll probably try to get some legal work at that point. Or they'll resort to petty crimes, which we can be on top of because now we have all these police resources we've freed up. The guys in the middle are the guys you have to worry about. For a few years, those guys will go nuts because they didn't get rich enough to retire, but they got too much of a record just to go back to normal life. A lot of them you'll have to just hunt down like dogs because it's not exactly a lot of mentally stable people who do the enforcement and do some of the dark things that gangsters and gangster organizations do. But the smart ones will get right out. No profit, they're gone. Instantly. Like, instantly. Now, there'll be a handful of organized crime holdouts, but, you know, those guys will really have to work to find a scheme that makes any sense, that makes any money. You know, the mafia in Italy is mostly poor. They're not rich. The mafia got rich because of Prohibition in the United States. Before that, they weren't rich. They just weren't. You had a mustache Pete, who would be the boss, and he'd have 6 or 7 guys underneath him who would muscle the locals. Only immigrants would pay because you couldn't go outside of your neighborhood. Somebody would call the cops. They didn't have any kind of institutional power. They couldn't bribe senators or anything like that prior to Prohibition. But once Prohibition started, they were making money hand over fist. And they bought guns. They got more guys. Everybody came here because that's where all the profit was. Then they started bribing cops and eventually moving up to senators and teamsters and all that kind of stuff you see in Martin Scorsese movies. If you legalize drugs and prostitution, you cut out all that revenue. The pyramid, and it'd be an economic pyramid of people on the street on the way up to the boss, it just collapses underneath them. He goes back to being essentially small-time hoods. Yeah, they rob houses, but they can't afford to hurt anybody. They just can't. They struggle just to survive. Now, that'll take a few years. Most of these families, again, will just retire. There'll be no revenue, and they already got their money. They'll just retire. And over the years, the remaining gangsters will go back down to what they were. Petty criminals. Yeah, they'll rob a bank now and again. They'll get ambitious, but it won't be anything like this. It won't be machine guns on the street. It won't be whole neighborhoods blighted because of crack. All that'll be gone. All you have to do is legalize it. Legalize drugs, Tim, and prostitution. And take your red pill.